In the fall of 1823, a grizzly sow tore Hugh Glass open, and his men took his rifle and fire kit and left him for dead. 6 weeks later, he crawled into Fort Kiowa. No gun, no fire. 250 miles behind him. But here's the twist. What carried him home was never grit. My name is Amos Ward. I'm 55 years old, seventh generation on this ridge in the southern Appalachians. My people settled it in the 1790s, and I've never left it. My grandfather Eli raised me, and before he passed, he made me copy every last thing he knew into a leather journal and swear the old ways would not die with me. This is me keeping that promise. The question is not what we lost, neighbor. It is who got rich when you forgot. And number 2 is the one that stings. But later, picture a camp on the upper Missouri, a hide pegged flat to the ground, a trapper scraping the hair off with the edge of a rib bone. He isn't done. He takes the animal's own brain, mashes it into warm water till it's a thin gray soup, and works that into the skin with his hands until the whole thing drinks it up. Here's the part nobody tells you. One animal carries almost exactly enough brain to tan its own hide. Nature already did the arithmetic. Then he smokes it low over punk wood, and that smoke is the trick. It lets the leather get soaked to the bone in a river crossing and dry back soft instead of turning to a board. That was his coat, his shelter, his bags, his cord. Weatherproof, silent, mendable, and it cost him nothing but a morning. Walk into any outfitter today and they'll sell you a sealed jacket and swear it breathes, while the tanning of leather got moved behind factory walls and chemicals until doing it with your 2 hands sounds like a reenactment. They didn't outlaw it, they just made you feel like a caveman for wanting to. But it still works, exactly as it did. The Lewis and Clark expedition brain-tanned right on the trail, and when they ran short of brains, they finished the job with plain soap. 2 centuries on, people tan the same way and get the same soft, breathing skin. The knowledge never quit. Only the habit did. You didn't forget how to do that on purpose, neighbor. Nobody sat you down and taught it, because there's no money in a man who can turn a deer into a coat. So I did the sitting down for you. Every one of these, the brain-to-hide ratio, the water temperature that kills, the years, the names, I've been copying into a record of my own, the same way my grandfather Eli filled that leather journal by the fire, so nothing walked off to the grave with him. I gathered it into one place and called it the Lost Frontier Skills Handbook. It isn't a course, and it isn't a lecture. It's the journal, opened up so the knowledge has somewhere to live that isn't just the inside of my head. Now, however you're watching this, if you're on the television in the front room, there's a small square code sitting up in the corner of your screen. Lift your phone, point the camera at it, and it'll carry you straight there. If you've got a phone or a tablet in your hand, it's the very first link underneath this video. And if you'd sooner just remember it, go to amosward.com. Say it slow, amosward.com. Write it on the back of a feed receipt if you have to. The whole library, one place, for less than a tank of gas. That's the only time I'll bring it up. Back to the ridge. A trapper needs to move a season's fur down a shallow, snag-filled river. And he has no boat and no sawmill. So he cuts willow, bends it into the bowl of a frame about 4 feet across and 18 inches deep, stretches a single bull buffalo hide over it, and greases the seams with elk tallow. The whole thing weighs around 30 pounds. One man carries his own boat on his back, and he leaves the hair on the hide. Not laziness, engineering, because a bald skin spins in the current and a haired one tracks straight. Scale the idea up, and skin boats ran 18 to 30 feet on the Missouri tributaries and floated 2 tons of fur down water too thin for anything with a keel. Today, the answer to "I need a boat" is a molded hull off a rack, hundreds of pounds and hundreds of dollars. And the notion that a boat is something you build from what died that week has gone clean out of people's heads. Not banned, just replaced, and the replacing was sold to you as an upgrade. But the design is still sound watercraft. The Lewis and Clark records document the bullboat in detail, and river people kept building them long after the beaver money dried up. Because a 30-pound boat you make in a day and carry on your shoulders beats a 200-pound one you buy and haul every single time. Cheap floats. Next one. The cold water work that paid for the whole era. This is the labor everything else was built on, and it was miserable. To take a beaver in prime fur you trapped in winter, when the pelt was thickest, which meant wading thigh deep into water cold enough to stop a man's patience with his own life. You staked a double spring steel trap on the bottom, ran a float stick so you could find the drowned animal. And here's the clever part. You baited the bank with castoreum, the beaver's own scent, milked from its glands. You turned the animal against itself. A good man read the sign, knew where they'd come ashore, and set where the water would do the killing for him. It cost the men their bodies. Standing in ice water season after season gave trapper after trapper a chronic rheumatism that never once left. And the market that made the pain worth it simply vanished. From 600 trappers working the Snake River country in 1826, down to about 50 by 1846. Fashion moved on. The men didn't get worse at it. The hats just changed. But the craft itself, reading water, understanding an animal well enough to let it walk into its own trap, that's still exactly how you do it. The trade died. The skill of thinking like the thing you hunt did not. That knowledge still works. The market for it just packed up and left town without telling the men who'd mastered it. Next one, why winter never rotted them from the inside. Number 12 is scurvy. A body needs only about 10 milligrams of vitamin C a day to hold it off, but muscle meat, the steak, the roast, has almost none. A man living on nothing but lean meat should have fallen apart by late winter, gums bleeding, teeth loosening. The mountain men didn't. Why? Because they didn't eat the way the story says they ate. They took the organs, the liver, the brain, fresh and often raw, where the vitamin lives, and they made boudins, the gut sausages stuffing the intestine with wild onions, herbs, and the half-digested grasses still inside the animal. That green mess is very likely the thing that kept scurvy off them clean through the cold. Here, I have to be straight with you, because the popular version is wrong. They survived on buffalo meat is only half true. Meat alone, if it's only muscle, would have killed them slow. It was the parts we now throw away that saved them. That's not folklore, that's nutrition. And it still holds. 10 milligrams a day, organs, over muscle. The number hasn't moved in 200 years. The men who sneered at the trapper eating a raw liver by the fire never knew he was doing chemistry his grandsons would forget. Free medicine. It just didn't look like medicine. Stop a second, neighbor. Notice the shape. Everyone so far, somebody quietly sold you the packaged version and taught you the old version was crude. That's the pattern. It doesn't soften going down the list. It sharpens. We think we understand hunger. We don't. A working trapper in the cold burned through roughly 9 pounds of meat a day when he could get it. William Clark wrote the ration down plain. It takes 4 deer, or an elk, and a deer, or one whole buffalo to feed the party for a single 24 hours. That is an engine running flat out just to keep a man warm and moving through country that wants him dead. Feeding it wasn't gluttony. It was the whole job. Hunt, or the cold takes you. The skill was never just pulling a trigger. It was knowing where the animals watered, moving quiet enough to close the distance, wasting nothing, because the next kill was never promised. On the plains, a fair day's ration ran 10 pounds of fresh buffalo, or 8 of moose. Numbers that sound insane to a man who eats a sandwich and calls it lunch. Today, that whole competence sits behind a set of automatic doors and a cooler case, and if those doors ever stay shut, most people have no idea how much food a cold body truly needs, let alone how to go and get it. Nobody hid this from you exactly. It just got so easy to buy that it stopped being worth knowing. But the body still burns what it burns. The arithmetic of staying alive out there hasn't dropped a single pound. Next one. They didn't always have the meat, so they ate the ground. The heroic version never shows the hungry weeks. But they were real. Osborne Russell was a trapper who actually kept a journal. Journal of a Trapper. 9 years in the Rocky Mountains. And in it he writes, flat and without drama, we had to live chiefly upon roots for 10 days. 10 days. No buffalo, no elk, just what a man could dig and gnaw to keep his legs under him until the hunting turned. Knowing which roots fed you and which ones killed you was no hobby. It was the thin line between a lean stretch and a grave. And where did that knowledge come from? Not from some lone genius working it out under a pine. It came from the native peoples who had lived on that ground for thousands of years and taught it to the newcomers, which plant, which season, which part. The trapper who lived was the trapper who'd listened. That's the piece the myth scrubbed out, and it's the one that still matters most. The plants haven't moved. The knowledge of them still works, still keeps a hungry man walking. What changed is that we stopped being taught and started assuming the ground beneath us has nothing to offer a modern stomach. Russell knew better on day 7 with dirt under his nails. The land was still a pantry. You just have to read it. Next one, how they walked on top of the winter instead of drowning in it. Deep snow doesn't just slow a man, it stops him. Every step punches through to the thigh, and a body wears out fighting powder long before the cold ever gets its turn. The answer was the snowshoe, a bent frame and a web of hide lacing that spreads a man's weight until he floats over drifts that would swallow him whole. With them, winter becomes a season you travel through. Without them, it becomes a wall. And once again, this was no trapper's clever invention. The snowshoe came from the native peoples of the North, perfected over more generations than the fur trade ever lasted, and handed to the newcomers who'd have foundered without it. A white trapper who could move at all in January owed that mobility to teachers the story later wrote out of the picture. Today you can buy a snowshoe of aluminum and synthetic decking, and it works fine. But notice what happened. The object survived, and the making of it, the understanding inside it, got left behind. Almost nobody who straps one on could build one from a tree and a hide the way it was done for centuries. The design is still perfect. The physics of floating your weight hasn't changed a hair. We kept the tool and quietly lost the knowledge that produced it. That's a trade nobody agreed to. The shoe still walks. The hands that could make it are what went missing. Next one, reading a storm hours before it arrived. Out there, a storm you didn't see coming wasn't an inconvenience. It was a sentence. And there was no forecast, no glowing screen in a pocket. So a trapper learned to read the weather off the world itself. The shift in the wind, the color of the light, the way the animals went quiet, the smell before snow. He could feel a bad night coming hours out and make camp while he still had the daylight and the strength to do it right. That reading was the difference between being tucked in when the front hit and being caught in the open when it did. This too was taught, not invented. The weathercraft of people who'd watched that particular sky for countless generations passed to men humble enough to learn. The trade ran on borrowed wisdom far more than on borrowed rifles. And here's the honest part. You can still learn this. The sky hasn't changed its tells. But we handed the whole skill to an app and stopped watching. So now a cloud is just a cloud. And the first most people know of a storm is a buzz on the phone. Free knowledge, written across the whole sky, and we swapped it for a notification. It still works for anyone who bothers to look up. Feel the turn, friend? The first few were tools you could hold. Now it's knowledge, the kind that lived in a man's attention. That's what really got sold out from under us. And the biggest one is still coming. Here is the number that should scare you more than any bear. Once a person is wet and the wind gets at them, they can die of exposure in about 3 hours. That's the whole margin. Soaked, wind-chilled clothing stops insulating you once the air drops below roughly 10 degrees Celsius. It isn't protecting you anymore. It's a wet rag hurrying you toward the end. The old hands knew the true enemy was never simply cold. It was wet and wind and time. So the entire craft was staying dry. The tallow-greased leather, the shelter up before dark, the fire you could always make. Not toughness. Management of a 3-hour clock that never stopped ticking. Now I owe you the truth, because this channel won't sell you fear it can't back up. The line, "A modern camper would just die out there," is too neat. In today's data, most backcountry deaths are falls and trauma. Hypothermia is only about 5% of hiking fatalities. Modern folks mostly die of accidents, not of missing bushcraft. The fair way to say it is this: strip a modern person of their gear, get them wet in a cold wind, and that 3-hour clock treats them exactly the way it treated 1830. No mercy, no exceptions. The physics is the villain here, and physics never takes a day off. The trappers didn't beat the clock with grit. They beat it with knowing. That knowledge is still the only thing that beats it. Next one. Sometimes knowing wasn't enough, and a man had to become his own surgeon. There were no doctors where these men worked. None. If you broke a leg 400 miles from the nearest anything, you set it yourself, or a partner did, and then you tended the wound and nursed yourself through the fever with nobody coming to help. That's a kind of nerve we've nearly bred out of people. The plain expectation that your body's repair is your own responsibility. First cut to last. They lanced their own infections, pulled their own teeth, set their own bones, and got back on the horse, because the only other option was to lie down and be finished. The villain here isn't a company. It's distance and hard luck. But notice what comfort has done to us in exchange. We gained real medicine, and I'll never sneer at a hospital, yet we lost the baseline steadiness that assumes you can handle your own body in a crisis. Most people now freeze at the sight of a deep cut on their own arm. And the honest reclaim is a balance, not a boast. You don't refuse the doctor. That would be foolish. And this channel doesn't traffic in foolish. But the calm the old men carried, the refusal to fall apart, the plain knowledge of how a wound heals and what a broken bone needs, that you can still learn, and it still holds. The body mends the way it always mended. What we misplaced isn't the medicine, it's the nerve. Next one is where a wound and the last thing you'd ever expect saved a man's life. Come back to Hugh Glass, torn open by that grizzly and left to rot. The old telling says his wounds filled with maggots, and every listener winces, because we hear maggots and think death. Here's the reversal. Those maggots may have saved his life. Fly larvae eat only dead, rotting flesh. They leave the living tissue alone and fight the infection while they're at it. What sounds like the lowest, most primitive horror is, in plain fact, medicine. And not only old medicine. The line of it is long and documented. Ambroise Paré noticed it back in the 1500s. Napoleon's surgeon, Dominique Jean Larrey, saw it on the battlefield. A Civil War doctor named John Forney Zacharias used it on purpose. Then in the 1920s, William Baer ran a real trial. 21 patients with wounds that would not heal. And after about 2 months, every last one was healed. It was revived again in the 1990s at a veterans hospital in Long Beach. And it works on infections that laugh at our strongest drugs, MRSA included. So here's the truth flipped on its head. That gross-out frontier detail is a cleared working therapy your doctor can order today. Larval debridement, FDA approved. The thing they taught you to gag at outperforms the antibiotics they taught you to trust on the very worst cases. That's the whole story of this channel in one wound. We didn't advance past the old way. We got embarrassed by it and threw a cure in the bin. Number 4, the camp that decided whether you woke up. A modern person thinks of a winter camp as a tent you buy and stake down. To a trapper, it was a life or death build. And another thing he'd been taught by the people who'd wintered that country long before him. How to sight it out of the wind, how to bank it, how to trap and hold a fire's heat through the killing hours before dawn. A bad camp in January didn't just make for a rough night. It didn't let you see February. The 3-hour clock from a minute ago runs all night long. And the winter shelter was the answer to it. The difference between sleeping through 30 below and never waking from it. No corporation killed this one either. Convenience did. You can buy a tent rated to temperatures you'll never test, and it works. And because it works, you never learn to make warmth out of the ground and the snow and the trees the way it was done for centuries. The object got better and the knowledge went to nothing. But the principles are permanent. Cold sinks, wind steals heat, dead air holds it. As true tonight as it was in 1830. And a person who understands it can stay alive in country that would kill the man beside him with all the gear in the world. The shelter still shelters. We just stopped learning to build one and started trusting a receipt to keep us warm. Number 3 is a man with no gear at all, none, outrunning death across a plain of cactus. In the fall of 1808, the Blackfeet caught a trapper named John Coulter, stripped him bare, and turned him loose to be hunted for sport across an open plain studded with cactus. No clothes, no gear of any kind. The exact nightmare that would end almost any modern person inside an hour. Coulter ran. He crossed miles of that plain with his feet torn to ribbons, killed the lead man chasing him with the pursuer's own spear, and then covered something like 250 miles of open country to reach the safety of a fort. Now let me be honest about this. 1, the way I promised I always would be. The details come to us second and third hand. Some tellings say 5 miles, some 6, some 7. Some say the long trek took a week, some 11 days. Coulter left no account of his own, so take the exact numbers as tradition, not gospel. But the core is real, and it's the whole point. A man reduced to nothing but his own body and his own knowledge of the land survived what gear could never have saved him from. That's the thing the myth gets backwards. It sells you Coulter as superhuman. He wasn't. He was a competent man who knew that country in his bones, and the knowing was the gear. Strip the legend off, and what's left is the lesson. The skill lived in him, not in his kit, and that's the only kind of skill that can't be taken. Number 2 is the piece the lone wolf story hoped you'd never hear. Here's the one that undoes the whole fantasy, and it's the truest thing in this video. The mountain man did not stand alone. Once a year, the entire trade gathered at the rendezvous, a supply fair hauled out from St. Louis, so the trappers could get powder, traps, coffee, everything the wild couldn't give them. The first was held on the 1st of July, 1825. Put together by William Ashley in what's now southwest Wyoming. About 120 men, one day. By 1837, the gathering drew 400 trappers and around 3,000 native people from 5 tribes, camped together for weeks. Read that number again. 3,000 of the very people who'd taught them the tanning, the roots, the snowshoes, the weather, the winter camps. Every skill on this list traces back through them. Many trappers took native wives whose craft they leaned on to live. The self-made man alone in the wilderness is a story a novelist sold you. The real man depended on a caravan and a continent's worth of borrowed wisdom, and he was smart enough to know it. This is the pattern break that eats all the others. The knowledge wasn't lost because one lone genius died. It was lost because we told the story wrong on purpose. Cropped the teachers out of the frame and left one white hero standing in the snow. And you can take it back the honest way. There's no shame in needing good people and good teaching. That was always the actual skill. Which brings me to number 1. Number 1 is not a trick. It's the thing the other 14 were all pointing at. And now you can hear the question the way I meant it at the start. It was never what we lost, it's who got rich when you forgot. Around 3,000 of these men ranged the mountains between 1820 and 1840. And here's what the romance won't tell you. They left almost no records of their own. The heroic lone frontiersman you picture was built largely afterward by novelists like James Fenimore Cooper and painters like Charles Diaz in the 1840s, while the men who were actually there got called shifty liars by their own contemporaries. The historian John Coleman put it plainly. The myth is a national invention, and Hugh Glass, the man we opened with, left almost nothing behind. So what's the real inheritance, if not the lone hero? This. Not that they needed no one, they needed their teachers, their wives, their once-a-year caravan. It's that they needed almost nothing you can buy. That's the sovereignty. Not standing alone, standing free of the store because the knowledge lived in your hands and your neighbor's instead of on a shelf with a price tag on it. Think of Glass again. No rifle, no fire kit, betrayed and left for dead. And he still crawled 250-mile home because they could take his gear, but they could not take what he knew. That is the whole thing. Everything on this list was one skill wearing 15 coats. The skill of not needing what they're selling. So tell me down below, neighbor, which of these 15 did your own people actually do? Not read about. Actually do with their hands. The one that shows up most in the comments is the one I build the next full video around. This was never a lifestyle channel. It's a library, and every one of you watching is one more set of hands keeping the doors open. Next time up on this channel, we go to a spring morning in May of 1810, and George Drouillard, the finest woodsman Lewis and Clark ever hired, and the day the Blackfeet finally caught the man who'd slipped them for years. Keep the old ways, friend. They kept us.